Swinburne University of Technology.
Okay, so welcome back everyone. We did get some feedback that up the back it was hard to hear, so could all the speakers just project, and also the questioners could say their name as well when they ask a question. And it is being recorded. Hope that's not a privacy issue for anyone. We can discuss the data ramifications for that later. So to lead off, we have Feng Wang, who is going to tell us about molecular science.
Good morning. My name is Feng Wang. I'm professor of chemistry, and today I'm going to present some of the recent advances. We use molecular modeling. So I'm a scientist, so now I'm talking about a little bit science by using the computers. Okay, why modeling? And then as we know, all the experiments cannot cover all the comprehensive science. So we need the computers and a theory to help us to give the big picture. So that's why modeling becomes a very, very important tools in modern days. And that means use a computer. Okay, let me tell you the first examples. This is the first theoretical gamma ray spectrum of a hexane. So we did this funded by ARC. So we are the first group which can calculate accurately use quantum mechanics, and then which agreed very well with experiment in both gas phase and crystal structure. So as you can see, and then before, there's no theory can do the calculation for that. And talking about gamma ray, this is the particle physics. And then basically it's about the positron and electron annihilation. So if a positron annihilates a moving electron, and it gives gamma ray, and then because the gamma ray is symmetric, so this is why we just show the half, and that's the Doppler shift. So we calculate the Doppler shift. This is in the area of particle physics. So that's my first example. The second one is ferrocene. It's one of my favorite. The ferrocene, as you know, is in organomechanical chemistry, and which is a very, very important drug. And then we start a drug, and then in a number of applications, including solar cell recently. And in ferrocene, and recently we use the infrared of ferrocene discovered. We can differentiate the ferrocene conformers, because this has been a headache for organic chemists for over 50 years, and we still couldn't determine which one is the most stable one. And recently we use the infrared. This is 50 years ago, nearly 50 years ago, the infrared of ferrocene experiment. As you can see, and then this ferrocene have two different structures, and then we identify this as the structure. As you can see, this one, the spectrum many years ago, they show this splitting. However, the analysis, they use the other structure to do the analysis. So because both structures are very, very high symmetry and very, very similar, and you really get to almost anything identical, including dipole moment. So you really need to find a special, unique structure or property which show only for one. And then we find that the infrared spectrum can help us. And then, so afterwards, we find that in theory, we design an experiment at the Australian synchrotron, and then this is the spectrum we just got. We just sorting out the data, and as you can see, and this is the split we find, which is the signature of one of the ferrocene conformers. Next one I'm talking about is about the solar cell. So we know the solar cell, among number of options, a number of issues. The most important one is the cost and the efficiency. So, and an organic dye synthesized solar cell is low cost, but the efficiency is low too. So what do we do? And as a chemist, what I'm thinking is change the molecule, because the engineers, they change the shape of the solar cell, and physics, they change the surface. And as a chemist, I change the molecule. So what we do is based on the existing dye, which perform reasonably good, and this is the donor part, this is the acceptor part, we change the bridge. So as you can see, this donor acceptor, by changing the bridge with different fragment of molecules, we can push the UV spectrum that way. We can push that way because you want to have the dye to cover broader areas to maximize your efficiency. So this is one of way we can do. We engineer the molecules, and but by doing this, which fragment you put to change the molecular structure, you get to know what the functionality and the properties do and the interactions between them. And another way is we deal with is to the role to the experiment. This is X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy. We work on dipeptides, and then this is one of the typical examples. The experimentalists at the synchrotron in Italy, they're trying to measure the linear peptides. And however, what they get is this spectrum, and they can't interpret because what they put in this is not what they put in the chamber. And then so this is stuck there for a long time. And then so we come to with a theory and experiment both joint jointly to study this, and then we find out that actually once you put in the dye in the chamber, it changes. Okay, and then so it's a chemical reaction into it. So basically, what you put into the chamber is not what you get. And then, so this one is on the issue of the cover page of Journal of Chemical Physics, which is an A-star journal. And then the last example is the one with the radio synthesizer for cancer. This experiment is done at Melbourne University actually, and then but the people originally can't analyze it. So recently we joined this, and we identified the radio synthesizers for this experiment. And then this is just, if you want to know more about what we do, this is just recently come out, and then the invited review about my own work in the past 10 years. This is I detailed in this what we did. This is my students and postdocs and research associates did the work we mentioned briefly. As you can see, we involved honors and PhDs and research associates. And of course, with resources, as you can see, if I acknowledge the people, that means we need this resource. Obviously, supercomputer is one of the most important things. Particularly, I'd like to acknowledge NSI and the Swinburne Supercomputing service, and which now provide us one of the key supercomputing service. And of course, the funding from ARC and the Swinburne Research for my PhD, for PhD scholarships. That's what we need. And the ARC for the funding some of the research associates. And so those are the collaborators. And so what do we need for the research? My research is low cost, and as long as we have the supercomputer, we can do a lot of research and with publications. What we need is Swinburne research with good PhD student scholarships, for example, and good access to the supercomputer and some of the access to the important softwares. Okay, so that's my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I have a question. In terms of the data resources you have and the data accessibility and stuff like that, do you collaborate? Do you have problems with collaboration in making your data public or available to other collaborators internationally and things like that? Like, how do you deal with those issues?
Yeah, we usually use the Dropbox,
yeah,
and then to share between the collaborators and something like that. Most of the big data, and then we install before we install in ANU the big computer. They have a data storage. We install there, and then so we don't transfer the raw data. We sort out the data because you know quantum mechanics calculations are huge. So we sort the data. What we transfer in the storage with Dropbox, for example, analyze the data, which is a lot smaller.
Cishen, can you come up? Could you come up and get your talk ready? So do we have any other questions? Yep. Mike, could you also say your name?
I'm Emmanuel, Finance, Planning and Performance. With the ferrocene conformer modelling, so you said you use the supercomputer. So what kind of,
Conformer.
how long will it have taken to do the checking of the different conformers and seeing the difference in the IR spectrum? Like what kind of computing time would you have used?
Good question. And then, as you know, particularly in biochemistry, chemistry and medical modeling, the conformers are very important because the biodiversity is caused by conformation. So, and then different conformers, for example, by drug, different conformers, they have different potencies. So that determines the shape. So, cutting short, for example, ferrocene looks small, and then just a couple of days ago, one of my students said, the supercomputer cut me off and said my variables are more than 50 variables. Because when you do the first thing is we need to do the optimization. As you can see, once your atoms build up more, and if you want to do accurate calculation, and particularly for ferrocene, because the conformers, the energy gap is very, very small, so we need accurate calculation, so that costs a lot. So depend on the accuracy of the level. So usually we determine that level by experiment. If the experiment can move to, for example, EV, and then we do the level of EV calculation. If the experiment move to by a wave number, we have to move up. So we really depend on what experiment can observe. So, and it can be huge. For example, ferrocene will saturate our supercomputer already.
So we should move on, okay. But thank you for that. So we need more supercomputer. It's the take-home message. So our next speaker is Cishen Zhang from Telecom, I think.
Good morning. Hello. Okay. Yes. I'm Cishen Zhang. I'm going to talk about compressed sampling. This is a research problem that the research group of electrical and electronic engineering at Swinburne is currently working on. So this compressed sampling technology is to enable sampling of a large volume of information with a small number of samples for transmission, storage, and reconstruction of the original information with accuracy. The compressed sampling problem is built on a very sound and rigorous mathematical result. That is a recent outcome due to mainly the original contributions. They are mathematicians. Torrance Tall is an Australian mathematician, quite well known, and he recently received a number of internationally prestigious awards in the mathematical society. So how the compressed sampling works. I demonstrate how it works with a simple example. We consider a simple sinusoidal waveform, and it has a frequency, it has a time domain representation as well. Correspondingly, it has a frequency domain representation. You can see in the frequency domain, it is sparse. It means it only has a very few number of non-zero elements, and otherwise is mostly of zero value. So the information measurement and processing problem is the first stage is to consider the measurement and acquisition of the information. So we need to sample it. The problem is how fast we need to sample. On one hand, if you sample more, you collect more information, you can reconstruct and you can display the original information more accurately. On the other hand, if you sample more, it means you need to use more computational resource and more sensor and more time. So it is a trade-off. There is a traditional theorem, and that is a standard result that the undergraduate science and engineering students learn it is called Shannon-Nyquist sampling theorem. It said that you need to use the sampling rate that doubles the frequency, the highest, the frequency bandwidth of the original information, and then you can fully recover the signal. So this, you see the dots, those are the samples. I have the indicator. How it works. Yes, if your sampling frequency satisfies the Shannon-Nyquist sampling theorem, you will be able to recover the signal. You see, in the frequency domain, you can almost recover the original frequency domain, and you get the original full information of the signal. If you sample it slowly, and then there is a phenomenon that is called aliasing in the frequency domain. So you get the frequency domain representation, you get the overlap on many frequencies, so you wouldn't be able to recover the original signal. Instead, you need to sample fairly fast enough by the traditional method. Okay, this is the photo picture that we took at the end of the last year before the restructuring of the Swinburne faculties and schools. So this photo picture represents the traditional sampling method. How is that? We have most of the faculty staff standing there, and the photography is on the upper level, and who took, I think, a number of dozens of shots, and we keep smiling and smiling, and about, I was there, and it's about more than half an hour. And then we produce this image. And it means that the traditional method takes the worst case. In order to get a good photo picture, it takes many, many times, and then select one of them. Okay, so that is the traditional method. The compressed sampling method looks at the problem differently. It looks the reconstruction of the image, the signal, and the measurement, and looks for a mathematical transformation. And it says that for the sinusoidal image, we sample randomly. And then the frequency domain, you see, although you get a lot of noise, the main information still standing there. All right, intuitively, if you remove the noise, you can recover the original information. That is the concept of compressed sampling, and followed by reconstruction by removing the noise. In the two-dimensional case, it is quite similar. You see the regular sampling and random sampling. And you see the original information can be easily recovered from the random sampling rather than the regular sampling. Okay, and the reconstruction of the original information is by optimization, computational optimization. And we have a number of applications in our group. And CT imaging is if you use small sampling, that means less X-ray radiation to the patients. And MR imaging, if you sample it using small sampling rate, it means a significant reduction of the MR scanning time. And we also have multi-sensor detecting of the targets. And there are many other successful and potential applications as long as the data measurement, collection, storage, transformation, reconstruction is involved. Thank you.
Questions? So what kind of data volumes are you having to deal with?
Oh, yes, typically for an MR image is 512 by 512, but if it is a four-dimensional, that will be more. Yeah, but it's the sampling rate that compress the original information is proportional to the logarithm of the original information data. It can be huge, depending on your computational capability.
And do you ever need to share this data with other groups or other researchers?
Yeah, a few years ago, I was working at Nanyang University, and we have continuous collaboration with Nanyang University in Singapore.
My guess is Dropbox is not enough for these kinds of data
yes,
volumes.
it's enough.
Okay.
It's enough. Yeah. So far, it's enough, but the problem can be working with a lot more larger data volume. Thank you.
Ewan, can you come up now? Do we have any more questions? Yeah, up the back there. Up the back. Just wait for the microphone.
I just wondered if you used those techniques on Matthew's astrophysics data. Or maybe it's a question for Matthew.
So the question
sounds like space data would have a lot of noise and signal, I imagine.
So the question was, can you do astrophysics with this science?
Yeah, there are a lot of applications, not mathematics, but in other applications there are.
Okay, thank you for that. Our next speaker, speaking of astrophysics, will be Ewan Barr talking about the square kilometre array. Have we lost your talk?
No, we have my talk, but is it possible to connect this through to the laptop? Thank you, Chris.
Do what I can. So you're plugged in there.
Yeah.
No, we're moving into outer space.
You may need to. Can be temperamental.
No, that's not what we want. Let me just bring up on this just in case.
I do have it here as a PowerPoint. If you want to just do it on here.
Yeah, we better not do that if that's the way.
But just while they're sorting this out, I find it remarkable that this is the first laptop issue that we've had, or talk issue we've had so far. Okay, great.
No, it'll work. Just put up on this.
So it's here. And this should work now.
Yeah, okay, great. So this was going to be full of beautiful videos, which are obviously...
The microphone?
I might even... Is it working? Hello? Yes. Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about the square kilometre array. Now, this was going to be a fantastically beautiful video from Swinburne Astronomy Productions, so just imagine that it's moving. And the Square Kilometre Array is an international project to build the world's largest radio telescope. It's a radio telescope array composed of many small individual elements. And it's going to be basically the best that we've ever had. It's going to be 50 times more powerful than any other telescope currently in existence. It's going to be able to observe the sky 10,000 times faster than any other telescope that we have currently. And it's a pretty big data challenge. It's going to produce about 5 petabits a second of data that we have to analyze. So this is a huge challenge for us. And the reasons we're doing this project, or we're involved in this project, is that the SKA will give us an opportunity to look at answering some really fundamental questions we have about the universe. Namely, what is gravity? Do we understand gravity on all scales? How did the universe form? How did it come to be as we see it today? And also, even more esoteric things such as, what are the origins of life on Earth, and are we alone in the universe? So these are pretty big questions that we're looking to answer. So Swinburne's involvement in the SKA comes around about pulsars. Now we have a very successful pulsar group here in Swinburne. And to describe what a pulsar is to you, a pulsar is the remnants of a supernova explosion. It's a very compact object that spins incredibly rapidly much more dense than the Earth. I mean, if the Earth had the density of a pulsar, it would fit inside Hawthorne campus. You know, these are extremely dense objects, and they spin very rapidly and emit beams of radio emission from above their magnetic poles. And we can time that radio emission, and essentially it makes these into atomic clocks in space. And if you have an atomic clock in space, you can do some fantastic experiments. And this really holds the key to understanding gravity. So, to get all of this interesting science out of pulsars, we need to do two things. We need to first find them through pulsar searching and time them, that is, monitoring of them. And here at Swinburne, we're involved in both of these projects for the SKA. On the pulsar searching side of things, we are developing massively parallel algorithms. We're looking at implementing new techniques and also looking at using new hardwares that haven't been used before for pulsar and quite a lot of radio astronomy work. Our main focus here, however, is pulsar timing. And here, again, we're working on algorithms and methodologies, and we're looking at building state-of-the-art instrumentation that will be used as the pulsar timing backends for the SKA. So we're working on both design and construction of prototypes for that. So this is where we stand right now. Our project is to design the pulsar timing backend for the SKA. We have been awarded an SKA pre-construction grant from the Australian government of about $1.2 million. So that's with an in-kind contribution from Swinburne. And that covers 5 employees, myself, Roland Van Straten, Matthew Bales, Andrew Jameson, Damien Hicks. And this funding is to run until mid to late 2016, where the SKA will go to a critical design review. If our design is accepted, which we think it will be, we will then look to bid for the construction contract that will become available in 2017. So the challenges of this system are many. In a microcosm, you can say the biggest challenge is perhaps just data rates. So we have to have a system which can take in about 1.2 petabits per second of data, analyze that, and our analysis is essentially just FFTs, a lot of FFTs, and large FFTs at that. And it dumps out about 1 gigabit a second of data. So you can see here, oh, sorry, FFTs, fast Fourier transforms, converting from time domain to Fourier domain. So we have a large number of FFTs. We're looking at something in the region of 100 teraflops of compute power required for this system. We need it to have low power consumption, high reliability, and we're building for a somewhat unknown technology readiness level. So what we need is we need to have the infrastructure here in Swinburne to be able to do the prototyping. And our prototyping will involve commodity off-the-shelf hardware, looking at developing specifically a high data rate I/O systems. This is the most important thing we need early or rapid access to the best hardware available. Now, in terms of this project specifically, we're talking about GPUs. And mostly we're talking about NVIDIA GPUs. So we have to have a strong link with NVIDIA. Graphics processing unit, highly parallel piece of hardware that lets you do some awesome computations. So what we're looking at the moment, we need platforms for developing a lot of the software, develop all our own software in-house. And we need very strong links with industry to make sure that we're ready for the technology that will be available when we come to actually build the SKA. So some closing remarks, and these are quite general. Big data astronomy requires big data astronomers. And they're a rare breed. The people that cross the divide between having very good physics and astronomy knowledge and very good computational knowledge are few and far between. And these are the people that we need. And Swinburne is in a position really to push forward as being a centre where we can foster these kinds of cross-disciplinary studentships. So I think that's a big thing for us, that we need to have people who are going to be capable of dealing with the data that comes out of the SK. Access to GSTAR is vital to pulsar science here. Anecdotally speaking, I was in Germany for 3 years before I came here, and it took me 3 years to do the amount of work that it took me 3 weeks to do here using the GSTAR supercomputer. So this has utterly revolutionized the way in which we do pulsar searching, for instance, and it drives innovation into new techniques that allow us to deal with the massive amounts of output that we have. And the last thing I was going to say is no one else has mentioned that Swinburne Astronomy Productions, I don't know where they fit inside eData Research, but they're a fantastic tool. Those guys produce awesome videos that allow us to do fantastic outreach. So that's a big thing for us as well. I'll just finish up there. Thanks.
Chris, could you come down? Okay, questions for Ewan?
So do you think we should directly train big data astronomers?
I think you should directly train astronomers and make sure that a lot of their curriculum involves understanding data.
Right.
I mean,
because all the good data scientists that aren't already astronomers are going to go work for Google.
Yeah, this was mentioned in a conversation I was having over coffee. This is a good point. Yeah, we need to make sure there's not a brain drain from within all of astronomy, all of radio astronomy, basically. So you need to foster interest both in the science and in the computation.
Wow, and a big part is money. Let's be realistic. There was a question over here. Microphone.
Technical question. You have input data and you do FFT and you get the output data. So if the measurements in the frequency domain or in the spatial domain, I mean the input data.
The measurements are all in, whether they're in both.
They are both.
Okay, can I just jump in?
Time
Sorry,
matrix.
to stay on topic here. Technical questions during lunch?
All right.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Thank you. E-research questions during talks. All right, great. Thanks, Ewan. Another astronomy talk, Chris Fluke.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about visualization and data analysis, what you're going to do when you actually have all of the big data that you've recorded. And at some point, hopefully, you're going to discover knowledge, and one of the easiest ways to discover knowledge in data is to actually look at it. And that's how this science comes out of the end of this magical system in the middle, our visualization and analysis system. So I want to ask you a question. How do you want to discover knowledge in your big data? Do you want to do it like this? Or do you want to use the transformational technology and do it a little bit more like this? Well, this is the vision that NASA presented over 20 years ago of how we would all be dealing with our data. And we're actually getting now surprisingly close to that. Apologise for the sound here. This is a little prototype of two new technologies. This is one of them is called a leap motion, and the other one is the Oculus Rift, the personal VR system. And rather than a system costing $10,000 or $20,000, for $300 you can get yourself an Oculus Rift, and for $100 you can get yourself a leap motion, and you can start to explore your data in very different fashion. And that's really what our scientific computing and visualization group within the Centre for Astrophysics and Supercomputing is interested in, is looking at transformational technologies to think about the way astronomers currently work and how they might work in the future. And to answer our resource question at the moment, we don't have any funding for personnel. All of the work that I'm going to show you has been done by the students listed there, and myself and my main colleague on this, Dr. David Barnes from Monash University. So just let me give you an example of the type of problem and how we would bring a transformational technology to that. We've just heard from Ewan about the SKA, or one of the steps towards that is the Australian SKA Pathfinder, and one of the science projects planned for this radio telescope, which is in its early phase of operation now, is something called Wallaby. It's about 100 team members, and it's interested in finding hydrogen in galaxies. So the first big data problem of the Wallaby project was that each piece of data that's going to be recorded is about 1 to 2 terabytes, and there's going to be about 1,200 of these, what we call data cubes, to deal with. And our question was, could we actually support real-time visualization and data analysis of a data set that's that size? Because I want to look at my data and then I want to quickly turn it around and do something else to it and not have to wait minutes to hours before I get a result back. Well, yes, we can, and thanks to Dr. Hassan, his PhD work and the creation of a software framework called Graphitiva, we were able to demonstrate that a half terabyte data set could actually be manipulated and visualized at about 7 frames per second. And the only thing really that stopped us from going further was the amount of internet bandwidth we had and the number of graphics processing units we have here. So this acronym GPU was also introduced in the previous talk. The GPU has really been a transformational technology for a lot of the work that our group's been interested in. So GPUs are massively parallel programmable computational co-processors. They've come out of the computer games market, so I love to tell school kids that they need to keep playing computer games for the future of astronomy. They can give you 10 to 100 times the speed up for certain types of problems. And it turns out the one that we were looking at was a great way to accelerate what we needed to do. The downside is you can't just use your existing code and hope that it works. There's a lot of extra development that has to go on. But we're very fortunate to have the G-STAR and the SwinStar facilities here at Swinburne, and that's a resource that we need to keep into the future. So that big data problem, number one, has been solved for now. I think we solved the problem before it actually became a problem for the Wallaby team, because they're still a few years off collecting data. The second one was, from these data cubes, what are they actually hoping to find? Well, about 500,000 new galaxies and perhaps 10 times as many false detections. And so what we're currently trying to think about is how many of those individual galaxies can you look at? You'll obviously run some automated processes on them at some point, but a lot of the discovery will come from looking at them. So here's the next transformational technology, where you take a GPU supercomputer and you sit it behind an advanced visualization facility. And this is the Cave 2 at Monash University, which I've been very fortunate to get some access to through David Barnes as the manager of this facility. It's about a 8 to 9 metre diameter ring, 80 high-definition 3D screens. One mode of operation is to use that as a single immersive space where you can actually walk around your data, and that is quite a compelling environment to be in for certain types of data. The way that we're using it, as you'll see it in this very low quality camera video, is each of these screens now we're putting 1 or 2 representative data sets to try and understand how you would use this as a collaborative environment for looking at galaxies. And one of the things that we've used here is some software, a software library developed locally for S2. I wish I could turn the volume down, but I can't. Which is some free software, and the goal of this software was to use the same tool on your desktop as you would use in a facility like this. And we're actually almost amazed at how simple it was to get our content working so easily in this Cave 2 environment. So at the moment, about 160 galaxies. Now we have to think about, is it sensible to look at that number of galaxies, and what are you really actually hoping to learn from them? So let me give you another example of the same infrastructure used for another problem, which is the early identification of Huntington's disease, a neurodegenerative condition. Maybe people in the audience who know much more about this than I do. But working with Govinda Powdal, who's the expert here, the domain expert, his first impressions when we showed him 80 or so brains within the Cave 2 was that it would take him many months at his desktop to make the kind of discovery he could make in about an hour, being able to see and sort and classify all of the brains in one go and see connections between pre- and post-Huntington sufferers and trying to make a discovery. So these sorts of environments are really important as we get more and more data to give us the capability to actually see something with it. So how do you want to discover new knowledge in your big data? Will you turn to a transformational technology like Elite Motion or an Oculus Rift, or does it actually take a much larger facility? What sort of capabilities do we think we need here? Well, I think the most important one, and we're hearing it a lot, is retention of talented, skilled people. And it's not just programmers. Programming is a piece of the puzzle, but it's also technical developers who can look at a very complex big data problem and understand what research is required what solutions might be required, and then your programming solution is almost the final stage once you've solved that. Certainly continuing support for high performance computing. Access to transformational technologies would be very nice. So the Cave 2 is at Monash. I showed in the opening slide a picture of what's called an OptiPortal, which is at Melbourne University. The Oculus Rift, I actually don't even own an Oculus Rift. This is the only piece of resource that actually is mine, and I didn't even pay for it. I had to ask for a free one. So access to these sorts of technologies, and we can perhaps talk later on this afternoon about what sort of other visualization facilities would be great to help us all do the types of things we'd like to do. Thank you.
Could you come down and questions? Ewan?
So where do you see this big data visualization going in the future? Because it seems to be quite a lot in the opposite direction to, for instance, a lot of the machine learning, etc., that's coming out at the moment. So does it have a strong long-term future?
I think it has to, because at some point you need to work out what algorithm you want to run on your data. And I think it would be very few scientists who would say we should never look at any of our data, even if it's just for a quality control process. How do you discover something when you don't know what it looks like? How do you know what it is that you might be wanting to find? Once you know what you're looking for, then it's very easy, I think, to go ahead and write an algorithm to find me more things like that. But as you would know from the SKA, a lot of it's about opening up discovery space. So unless we have the capability to look at data, and we may only need to look at it for an hour, and that's it, we may never need to look at it again. Without that capability, I think we're missing an opportunity for some type of new discovery.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but just to put one more comment on that, a lot of what's going into machine learning right now is about unsupervised machine learning, where the machines are learning basically just patterns. They're doing exactly what you're talking about, which is finding the new things that we don't already know about. Granted, you need to visualize them afterwards, but is this a kind of symbiotic relationship, for instance?
I think they work together. Okay. They definitely work together.
We should. Next speaker is Amanda Lawrence, talking to us about policy now.
Yes, is that all coming through okay? Great, okay. Hi, yes, I'm Amanda Lawrence from Policy Online, and I'll just briefly explain a little bit about what we are and our background and some of the features and things we've got, and then look at what we need. So this is Policy Online. If you don't know what it is or haven't been to it, we bring together public policy research and resources, primarily what's known as grey literature. It's not just from Swinburne, it's from all over Australia, New Zealand, and often internationally as well. So we are designed for researchers and policymakers who need access to full-text policy-related grey literature and data, research and resources produced by organisations. So that's a quick definition of what I'm calling grey literature. Policy Online is a repository, it's a website and it's a network, and it's the most timely, comprehensive and accessible source of grey literature policy research in Australia and New Zealand, and even internationally it's quite a unique resource. Our history is been going since 2002, so about 12 years now. We were initiated by the Swinburne Institute for Social Research, and we're still part of the Swinburne Institute for Social Research, which has been a fantastic supporter of the project. We've had 6 ARC linkage infrastructure and equipment grants, and funding is an absolutely pivotal source of our sustainability. We've also had a number of partnerships over the years with Swinburne, but also with other universities and organisations, and we also get income from advertising and some other sources. We just raised $10,000 in donations in a couple of weeks, so that was a bit of an indicator of the level of support that we have within the wider community. Our funding partners at the moment, Swinburne University, obviously a key partner, the Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand, the Australian Research Council, RMIT and the University of Adelaide. So they've all been partners on our ARC grants, but also contribute funding directly to us as a project. We're a small team that only a couple of those people in staff are actually full-time. Tia is an IBL student. And we have an editor part-time, a deputy editor who's also part-time, a website manager, and I'm actually only on the project a couple of days a week and also work on an ARC linkage grant on grey literature. So just some vital statistics. We have about 17,000 items, research items. We post about 50 items a week. We have newsletters with about 17,000 subscribers, 600,000 total visits. We get an audience from government, education sector, NGOs, media and others. So this isn't just an academic tool, but it is certainly an academic tool, but it's also a really important dissemination tool. So grey literature, you may never have heard of it. It's all sorts of things. So the top three things there are what would be considered not grey literature, the output, traditional output of universities, journal articles, books and news reports. What this slide is showing you is a survey we did last year of 1,000, an online survey of around 1,000 respondents. And we asked them what was, of the material that they used, what was important to them. So yes, journal articles are important, but you'll see actually reports are more important. The fourth item down. Discussion papers, briefings, data sets are also extremely important. And overall reports for this group, which covered public sector employees and also researchers, reports are actually more important overall. So this is extremely valuable material which is generally overlooked in the academic world as an entity, which we're trying to explore in our ASC linkage, but also which we provide a service in collating and collecting. There's a lot of different producers. Actually, academic centres are a key producer, so this isn't something that just exists outside of academia. And then government departments and think tanks and so on. And just a point, ERA is now collecting reports as part of non-traditional outputs. So this is increasingly being something that may be measured and counted, which would be really good. We have a lot of Swinburne material. This is the Institute for Social Research page where we've got their content. So our latest ARC linkage, ARC LEAF grant was to look at how to increase our interoperability as a database. Oh, I should have mentioned, actually, we've also just got ANDS funding for a new project, which I'll talk about in just a minute. So we have a lot of facets and part of, as a repository, and part of that is developing and implementing the Library of Congress subject headings, which will give us linked data capability. Also putting in geonames so that we can connect up to international interoperable systems in terms of coverage classification. So I'll skip that, but this is the sort of thing we're trying to move to, a new way of looking at content, being able to see where the coverage of content is, click on material. We're then, part of this project is to connect up to Informant, which collects journal articles, and bring the grey literature and the journal material together using those classification systems that I mentioned, the FAST system. So trying to move increasingly to interoperable information management systems. There are a lot of standards out there, and we're trying to work our way through to figure out what is the most valuable metadata. Metadata is very costly to add in. What do we really need to use and what's going to be useful? So that's that's sort of an example of, say, a term such as racism, where we can bring the content together from different sources. We've also got a new project funded by Australian National Data Service to implement digital object identifiers on policy online. and these are the sort of identifiers you'd be familiar with from a lot of journal articles. So to also get that onto grey literature and onto grey data, and that will be really quite a unique project for improving the status of this material internationally and in Australia, and help us to provide ongoing stability and credibility. I'll just quickly skip through some of these new features that we're looking at, and these are some of the things we'd like to move to. Possibly a new project where we are able to pull any sort of content together, like Figshare or academia.edu. And automated indexing of content would be a really fantastic thing. What we need from Swinburne, ongoing core support. So having to leap from grant to grant means that we're often having to abandon well, not abandon, but move on to new projects when we're really sort of struggling to keep our main core work on happening, but also venture capital to be able to do new and exciting things in this area. Access to expertise and ideas from within Swinburne, access to e-research and data and information management, business and planning capability. It seems like a basic thing, but actually finding out how to run and maintain and make money from a system that provides open access to free content is really quite difficult, and we're not the only project on the internet that is struggling with this. So how do we look to the future of information provision online, and what other collaboration could we be doing internationally in Swinburne in Australia? These are the reasons why we'd ultimately like to do all those things.
Great, thank you. Let's thank. So do we have any questions? Matthew?
How many key staff are there?
Well, probably 3. So we're about to, really we need to replace my position. We need a full-time business and information manager. So yeah, I would say at least 3, and if we could get more, that would be great. We also have a bit of support from external developers, but it's been a real transformation in the last couple of years to have an internal developer.
Thank you. Could you come up, please? Do we have any other questions? So I have one. What is the biggest technical challenge that you face making this all happen?
Probably keeping up with the technology, just keeping our data clean. So moving from one system to another system, a lot of the data was not really developed with the idea that it would be a repository. It was more developed as kind of news and information service. And you know, as we've tried to get more and more sophisticated with the data, the metadata that we have, then we've got 20,000 records that are actually missing certain information. Yeah, so actually sort of going back and doing data cleaning is a big issue. We could sort of simply apply a new technology, but if the metadata isn't there, then we're not going to. So getting that geo coverage. Before we had a very simple geographic classification system of pretty much 10 categories, whereas what we're now wanting to do is not just say, something's from New Zealand, or I think we had New Zealand and the Pacific. We want to say it's actually about Auckland. So it's not from those places, it's what's it about. Is it about, the camps on the Thai-Burma border? If a lot of people in the Institute for Social Research are doing refugee studies, this is an area where, the information, if we knew more about where it was about, that would be really useful, but we have to get that metadata in there. And so auto indexing could be really fantastic for that.
Great. All right, well, thank you very much for that. Could you switch the mic over? So our second last speaker is Ellie Rennie. We'll be talking on tracking infrastructure in social media.
Yes, thanks. I'm also from the Swinburne Institute. You may have seen a story in the papers in recent weeks about Facebook, or people using Facebook, to understand the effects of people's news feeds on other people, so manipulating news feeds in order to gauge whether that had an effect on other people's moods, or at least the representation of their own moods to other people. Let me just say straight out, that is not the kind of research that I'm talking about today. What I'm talking about is using publicly available information from social media, such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and analysing that for the purposes of social research. So the TRISMA infrastructure is about to commence. It is a LEAF grant that Swinburne's involved in with QUT, Curtin, and Deakin. And this infrastructure initially is going to give Swinburne researchers access to 6 million Australian Twitter users, and for each of those users, 3,000 tweets deep. So QUT data scientists have already built this database, which enables them to, within the terms of use of Twitter, basically harvest and store that information. The next step is to have data scientists across all the universities being able to work with researchers to query that data. So from there we hope to expand out from Twitter to publicly available data, say on Facebook groups rather than individual private Facebook pages, but also Instagram and other platforms. So what kind of projects are we talking about here? Just to give you an example of how I was thinking of using this infrastructure. So my research is on Indigenous media and broadband adoption in remote Indigenous communities. But one thing that I'm interested in using this infrastructure for is to look at the influence of the Indigenous media sphere. So where are Indigenous issues being retweeted, and what sources are those tweets using? Is it Indigenous media or mainstream media? And that helps us to gauge, I suppose, the Indigenous public sphere, moving away from research that looks just at the right to speak for Indigenous people, but also who's listening and how that information is shared. So who will be able to access this infrastructure? I think that the process that we develop will depend upon demand. So we will have a 0.4, at the moment it looks like a 0.4 data scientists for 1.5 years. It's a 2-year leaf at the moment. Of course there's the potential to employ data scientists for longer if more people would like to use the infrastructure. In terms of answering the questions that were put to us at the beginning of the day, I think one of the big benefits of this type of infrastructure for us at the Swinburne Institute is that it's going to enable us to really develop postgraduate training around this type of big data social science research, so computational social science and digital humanities. And I think that there is a massive gap in Australia at the moment in that postgraduate training area. But of course it will enable our postgrads to move on to jobs not just in universities but in the public service and in industry, or to become even better management consultants than the ones that currently do this type of research. The challenges, I suppose, of course, will be the longevity of this infrastructure. We are already starting the next LEAF grant, even though the project has not even commenced yet. And as I said, I'm not sure what the demand will be, but that is something that we'll have to gauge over time. We're very interested in working with other researchers within Swinburne on visualisation of this data. And for those of you that would like to hear more about how this will work, but also the kinds of research that are already being done, particularly from the media communications discipline, we've got Axel Bruns, who's the first chief investigator on this LEAF grant, and Jean Burgess from QUT here on August 15th giving a seminar on it. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you very much for that. Do we have questions? Look, could you come and get your talk ready? Thank you. Questions? Yep. Just wait for the mic. And could you state your name as well?
Thomas from the Institute for Social Research. Ellie, one of the things that's distinctive about this kind of infrastructure is that what we're trying to do is work with data that's come from what are really commercial media platforms, rather different from some of the kind of public sector data sources that we've heard about today. So I'm just wondering how much of an issue is it for the TRISMA project in terms of how you are accessing the data and how are you negotiating the terms and conditions around the use of that data? Are you buying this data from for example, one of Twitter's designated resellers, or is it being scraped independently in some other way?
Initially, the intention was to buy the data from NUP, but we have been looking at the terms of use, and it now appears that we don't need to do that if it's for research purposes. And I think some of the other questions I think that we will have to deal with is how this kind of consortium of universities that are storing and using this data, how that consortium itself will evolve. But yeah, at the moment, we're trying to work with what's publicly available.
Okay, any more quick questions? We have our last speaker for this morning's session, Angela Daly.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay? Yes, okay, great. So I'm Angela Daly. I'm another researcher in the Swinburne Institute for Social Research. We seem to have the kind of block just before lunch. So I hope you're not too kind of de-energized with the data proliferation that we have now for the various kind of services that we use, the Internet of Things, and so on and so forth. There's also these kind of distinctions in the law which are not really borne out in practice. So this one, the difference between metadata and personal data, it's a distinction that breaks down in practice. A very detailed picture can be built of individuals from their metadata, but it's a distinction which still applies in the law. So arguably it's quite outdated. Also the idea of anonymizing data about people is a bit of a concept which is present in the law, but actually in practice, and I'm sure many people who are working in these more technical areas than me know about this, it might be quite difficult, if not impossible, to anonymize data completely, so make it completely unidentifiable. Again, there's a big surveillance risk with big data, so the more you collect, the more risk of surveillance there is, either in the sense of, I don't know, surveillance for the purposes of commerce or surveillance for the purposes of the state and law enforcement and so on. It's not a big surprise that if you're aware of the Snowden revelations that various kind of law enforcement agencies in the US and elsewhere have tapped into the big data that's held by Google and Facebook and all the rest of it, because these are massive amounts of data that have built very detailed pictures of people. So actually that's kind of my last point, that big data, for all it can do good, can also build very detailed and intrusive pictures of private individuals.
Right, thank you. I hope we follow up this workshop with some, like a lecture series or something, because there's a lot of the talks could be expanded into a, something like that, which would be very interesting all on their own. Do we have questions? Up the back there.
Hi, Janet Hiller, Dean of Health Sciences. I've done some work on direct marketing to consumers of products that are not approved by the TGA, for example, because of the social marketing and international networks. Is that an area that's of interest? Because I think that it's really a growing issue for the healthcare system.
Yeah, thanks very much. I have to say, not an area that I know a huge amount about in the specific laws, but this whole idea of kind of regulations being bypassed is definitely an area that I work in. And also, I mean, the project that we're doing on 3D printing, we're just beginning to think about, for instance, you know, printing medical implements which are not necessarily, you know, subject to regulation. And so these problems that come up as a result of various kind of new technologies.
No more questions? All right, before we give some announcements, let's just thank all the speakers from this morning.
I just have a few announcements. First, thank you to Darren for chairing that session. So this afternoon after lunch, we'll be coming back for a panel discussion. We have a number of guests, external, from Melbourne, University of Melbourne, VicNode, Nectar, who have come. So the first two talks after lunch will be Stephen Manos from Melbourne ITS for Research and David Flanders. And I encourage you all to come back for the capability talks and the discussion session. Research Bazaar is sort of a new thing at Melbourne, which I'm a huge fan of, so I'm going to give it a pre-plug. So it's basically, Melbourne have figured out a way to, you know, really help researchers in this area in terms of software boot camps, I guess identifying all these sorts of relationships within research and the services that ITS offer them. So I think that's going to be a really good talk, and it's something that Swinburne can really learn from. So I encourage you to come back for those. The panel discussion, we'll be inviting the speakers to be involved in that. Also Leon Sterling and Carl Glazebrook will be involved in that session. We have, so just to point out a few visitors, if people can raise their hands, we have Glenn Maloney, who is the director from Nectar. We have Stephen Manos and David Flanders from Melbourne. We also have Richard Ferris here from ANS. So Richard is Swinburne's official client liaison from ANS. And ANS have been involved in a number of projects. So some of the funding support that they do actually give us is for DOIs and metadata stores. So if you're interested in that aspect of your research, please talk to Richard sometime today. We also have a whole bunch of ANS brochures and some other research materials down the front. So use the lunch break as an opportunity to network, talk to me, talk to all the speakers, talk to Darren. And throughout lunch, keep in mind that after this, in the next session, what we really want to know is what you guys want from Swinburne, and where do we need to go ahead. So be prepared to come back with all your questions. We will have a whiteboard, so it'll be a bit of a brainstorming session. We want it to be very interactive. So that's all I wanted to say. Oh, lunch is out there, and we'll be coming back at 1:30.
This has been a Swinburne production.